In one of the opening prayers for today's Mass, the Collect, we hear this image. God of everlasting mercy, who in the very recurrence of the Paschal feast, kindle the faith of the people you have made your own. Kindle the faith of the people you have made your own. It's a strong image. While I was never a Girl Scout long enough to learn how to start a fire very well, I've watched a lot of people struggling to kindle reluctant logs into flame. This one right here took us quite a while today. And I can remember camping with my community mates during JVC. Dinner time was always one of the most stressful moments for us because everyone would be getting really hangry and we were often frustratingly slow at trying to coax the flames out of our damp logs. We would search for coals and embers to try and stoke things left over from previous fires. We would crumple up bits of paper and newspaper hoping something would catch. And we would search the campground for sticks that weren't too green or too damp. And we would lean down into the pit to blow at the base of our tiny flames, encouraging them to burn brighter with our breath. Kindling can be a tough task. In today's Gospel, Jesus kindles the faith of his weary and frightened disciples. He breathes on them, saying, "Receive the Holy Spirit." Jesus doesn't rebuke his followers for hiding in fear or for failing to understand his resurrection. Instead, he comforts and encourages them. Peace be with you. Receive the Holy Spirit. It isn't hard for me to get inside the experience of those disciples. They were locked up together during a dangerous time, paralyzed by grief and afraid to leave the house. I imagine their lives felt like they lacked purpose during this time. They had lost so much. It doesn't sound too far off from our current experience, staying at home in the midst of a pandemic. We've all suffered losses, big and small, and many of our days may feel like they lack purpose. People have lost their jobs, their health, or their loved ones. In an attempt to mitigate these losses, we've been asked to stay locked up in our homes as much as possible. But Jesus comes through locked doors. There's nothing that can separate us from him. Jesus breaks into the disciples' grief to offer peace. He understands their suffering. He still bears the wounds from his own suffering, and he comes to transform their suffering into joy. Today's first reading reveals the transformative power of God's presence. Awe came upon everyone, and many wonders and signs were done through the apostles. These same disciples, who once huddled together in grief, kindle the whole world with their witness of joy and love. Every day, they devoted themselves to meeting together in the temple area and to breaking bread in their homes. They ate their meals with exultation and sincerity of heart, praising God and enjoying favor with all the people. And every day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. If we allow the Lord to enter through the locked doors of our homes, how might our world be transformed when we leave them once again? The community described in this first reading from the Acts of the Apostles is a community animated by the Holy Spirit, a community whose faith has been rekindled through the breath of Christ. Just as Jesus transformed their suffering into joy, the disciples now transform others' suffering into joy, generously working towards the common good with zeal. They share all things in common, selling their property and possessions and dividing them among all according to each one's need. It is Jesus' life-giving breath that transforms fear and uncertainty into peace and confidence in the Spirit. There's a beautiful scene that describes this transformation process in C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. In the second to last chapter of the book, Lewis writes, "What an extraordinary place," cried Lucy. "All those stone animals, and people too. It's like a museum." "Hush," said Susan. "Aslan's doing something." He was indeed. He had bounded up to the stone lion and breathed on him. "Oh, Susan, look! Look at the lion." I expect you've seen someone put a lighted match to a bit of newspaper which is propped up in a grate against an unlit fire. And for a second, nothing seems to have happened. Then you notice a tiny streak of flame creeping along the edge of the newspaper. It was like that now. For a second after Aslan had breathed upon him, the stone lion looked just the same. But then a tiny streak of gold began to run along his white marble back, and then it spread. Then the color seemed to lick all over him as the flame licks all over a bit of paper. And while his hindquarters were still obviously stone, the lion shook his mane, and all the heavy stony folds rippled into living hair. Then he opened a great red mouth, warm and living, and gave a prodigious yawn, and now his hind legs had come to life. He lifted one of them and scratched himself. Then, having caught sight of Aslan, he went bounding after him, frisking round him, whimpering with delight, and jumping up to lick his face. In this scene, the longest winter that Narnia has ever known has just ended. Aslan has allowed himself to be sacrificed, and he goes around breathing on the stone statues, bringing them into life. When Jesus breathed on his disciples, I imagine it might have been similar to this scene. They might not have felt any different at first. Their faith probably wasn't kindled in an instant. But hush, Jesus is doing something. Gradually, a tiny streak of flame was growing in their hearts, transforming their grief and their fear into peace and confidence in the Holy Spirit. Come, Holy Spirit, breathe on us and kindle the faith of the people you have made your own.